why isn't this front page news? Why aren't people talking about this at the dinner table? It's almost as if we've just sort of accepted that there's nothing we can do about it, and this is how it is.
Welcome to Self-Funded with Spencer, sponsored by Pareto Health, ClaimDoc, and PlanSight. Whether we're discussing innovative new healthcare strategies, exposing hidden revenue streams or misaligned incentives, or even just cheering on the next generation of this industry, we promise you that you're going to learn something. So thank you for joining us for another great conversation about the future of healthcare.
I did join the NFL as a cheerleader in Washington, and I had the opportunity to volunteer with the USO, and it was right around the time that we had entered the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and people were coming over, and I actually ended up doing an internship in the amputee ward. Oh. And it was...
I can't even imagine that.
Right?
Yeah.
And these are my peers, because that's the age I was. They're 22, 23-year-old men and women. And it was a life-changing experience for me because I saw these people come over with, PTSD, mental health stuff going on, obviously amputations, physical things going on, brain injuries. And they came home and they were completely embraced by the healthcare system. And what I know now is that the program that I was an intern at was a highly publicized, very PR-oriented.
Glossed over version of it.
I mean, it was like, of course they had all the resources because this was the PR campaign that said, look what a good job we're doing with these poor young men and women. But it really changed the way that I thought about human suffering in relation to medicine.
Okay.
And I was already, engaged professionally at that point, dancing, and that was the direction my career was going. And so I said, well, I got to do this while I'm young, while I'm here. Yeah. I ended up moving overseas and dancing in Germany, and one more year turned into a total of 8 years, right? And I found myself over there, and I said, well, I'm 30. It's really time to get a real job. Okay. Like what do I need to do? And the only thing I wanted to do was enter healthcare. Okay. And so that's the story. And I went back to school.
Because I was trying to connect the genesis for you, how you entered the healthcare realm. And so you mentioned you grew up in Louisiana. What part?
Middle of nowhere.
Okay, middle of nowhere.
So, nowhere.
And is that where you went to college as well?
No, I went to college in Baltimore.
In Baltimore, okay.
Yep, because I married this military guy.
That's right.
We ended up back up here.
Connection.
Yes.
And that's how Germany entered the fold at some point as well? Okay.
Yes. And so then I was there. I was going to do medical school in Germany. Got into the university there and was prepared to do that. And then took a look around and said, do I really just want to be stuck in Europe forever? I mean, Europe's a great place to be, but is it a great place to be for the rest of my life where I can't work?
Sure.
Maybe, maybe not. And so it was at that point that I moved home. I actually took a job with doing research at Johns Hopkins, which is how I first learned about self-funding.
Really?
Because we were actually selling a version of the diabetes prevention program, which is diet and exercise, healthy eating, patient education to help people lose 5 to 10% of their body weight. And the argument that we were making, that our sales team was making, was that if people didn't have diabetes, their self-funded healthcare spend would be less. And so, anyway, that was my first introduction.
I'm going to say, I agree with that argument, too, right?
Okay.
I think it's a relevant argument to make, right? There's a gentleman named Preston Pomical. I actually just went to a soccer game with him this weekend, but he's at BEXA, which is he's the chief growth officer at BEXA, which is a breast cancer detection, early stage breast cancer detection.
Yes.
Differences in elasticity versus density. It's a supplement to a mammogram, not a replacement, et cetera. But one of the things he said on my podcast a couple of years ago when he was still a consultant at the time is if you really want to move the needle in healthcare, you just have to produce less disease in the first place. It's it sounds so profoundly simple and obvious, but that's really what we're at. I say all that to say, I agree with that.
Exactly, right? And so that's what I was advocating for. And in the meantime, I was going on this project. I was loving the impact that I was seeing in the patients. But I was sitting in rooms where I didn't feel like I had the letters behind my name that I needed in order to have the credibility to say, this is the direction we should go, this is what we should do. And so I went back to school. And
how long do you go to school to be a PA rather than an MD?
2.5 years.
Okay.
The actual educational portion of it is 1 semester shorter than medical school because we go throughout. But the biggest difference is that I don't have to do a residency and an internship because the assumption is that you will always have access to an attending physician.
Okay.
And so while I was in school, I had no idea what I wanted to go into, but my heart really was still stuck in that place thinking about, the people I grew up with and friends and family members who had gotten lost in the system because they were uninsured or underinsured. And so I really felt drawn to the emergency department because I felt like that was the space where I could make the biggest impact in that population.
Sure.
And that's where I ended up. And it didn't take me long in the emergency department to realize that there's no amount of hours I could work or, care I could give or time I could spend with patients that would make a difference. Because what I started doing out of anxiety and learning and, what have you, was I would go into my shift early, like an hour early, and I would print out a patient list from the last time I was in the ER, and I would call them. And I would just say, hey, Mr. Smith, I saw you had I know I treated you for this cat bite. How's your arm feeling? How's it going? And some larger than I was comfortable with percentage of the time, the answer that I would get wasn't, oh, that medicine you gave me was garbage, right? But the answer was, well, I didn't pick up the medicine. Well, why not?
Yeah.
Like this is a life-threatening thing. Like how did you not pick up the medicine? Well, my insurance company said I could only go to this particular pharmacy and they were out of the medicine, or the copay was outrageous, or whatever the case was. And having several hundred of those experiences made it very clear that there is no army of clinicians who can come in and save the world, no matter how smart you are, no matter how motivated you are, no matter how empathetic you are. It just can't happen. And that the only way to make the difference that I wanted to see for the communities that I wanted to help was to move into the business side.
Okay.
So that's the story.
That's a great story.
Right?
I don't even think by the way, we started. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that.
We just started. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause I didn't want to stop you. And honestly, I think it's better if we start without a cold start. But I didn't say, hi, Tiffany.
That's totally
Tiffany
fine.
Ryder. Obviously, I want to at least have a chance to say your name and say hello. But I learned a lot about you just then because I didn't know your backstory. And usually we have coffee beforehand, and obviously time didn't allow for that. But it's great. I actually enjoy when it's organic and I get to learn about somebody in real time. And so then from that experience, did you leave? You said you were a practicing PA up until March of this year.
Yeah.
So then have you left that world altogether? Is that something you could see yourself going back to?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love medicine. I find it interesting and just intellectually stimulating. It's like a puzzle that I get to solve. And it's like a puzzle that you solve and then you get to help people, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But I don't see that I'm going to have the impact that I want to have on the world using the, whether it's God-given or cultivated skills, whatever that is that I have inside of me. I don't see practicing medicine ever being really the best use of that. And so
I could see it I'll give you a corollary. I can imagine you as a PA on a one-to-one basis can impact somebody's life in the care that you deliver to them. The person that owns the hospital, for instance, has the ability to create an ecosystem in which it empowers you to do that. Just like a gym owner could be a personal trainer and impact on a one-to-one basis, or own the gym that allows personal trainers to exist.
It's exactly
And so it's the scale of the impact, although the depth you might say is not quite as deep as a one-to-one patient interaction.
Yeah.
But you've created a system that now facilitates a better version for multiple people across the spectrum. So I can see where you would want to shift the scale of your impact.
Pareto Health is the largest benefits captive in the United States. With nearly 3,000 captive members, 1.3 billion of stop-loss premium in force, and almost 1 million covered lives, no other benefits captive comes close to Pareto Health's scale. But it's not just about the numbers. Pareto Health is a mission-driven organization, and that mission has two distinct parts. Number one, to make self-insurance simple and more accessible for small to mid-sized employers. And number two, to arm them with the most powerful cost management tools on the market. So if you're an employer frustrated with your healthcare outcomes, or you're a benefits consultant looking for an alternative to the status quo, it's time to consider Pareto Health. Pareto Health, where employers come to do self-insurance right, to do it easily, and to do it at scale.
But so like now you shift this to thinking the business side of this, not just the care delivery side of that. So where are you at now with this idea of patient advocacy and establishing a model that you think will be really effective?
Yeah, so, you know, it's been a dynamic process. So it started for me a couple of years ago. I read Marty McCary's The Price We Pay. Which so many of us have.
I literally talked about it this morning. So
I talk about it just about every day as well. And I actually, you know, when I first decided that something had to be done because I felt like I was complicit in a system that was hurting people, even when I was doing everything right and helping, I felt like I was putting, you know, $10,000 bandaids on someone's diabetic ketoacidosis instead of actually helping them to never be there in the first place.
Okay.
And when I got to that place, I said, okay, like how do I get myself in a place that feels morally aligned with where I want to be? And anyway, and I read the book. And I said, okay, that's it. No more overtime, no more paying off student loans. Like, I'm going to work the minimum number of shifts that I need to work to be full-time and pay my bills. And I'm going to figure it out. And I went through that book and through Marty's book, because it was the only point of reference that I had. I went through it with a highlighter and I highlighted all the names of the people that he mentioned in the book. Yes, and companies that he mentioned in the book. And I said, well, I wonder how I can talk to these people. Oh, let me check LinkedIn. And I went to LinkedIn, and that's how I started writing on LinkedIn, was just because I wanted access to these people who were thinking about healthcare and the system differently.
Well, so you using LinkedIn, I actually had, I don't know if you know who Kimberly Carlson is with US Beacon. They do claims review. So I had her on this morning. She's from Arkansas. But I was just talking to her this morning about how effective she is at utilizing LinkedIn to talk about what she does, but she does it in a way that she's constantly delivering, like, here is a problem. Here's how we solve it. But it's also an awareness campaign that she seems to be going on. And I don't even know if she's intentionally doing it, but it created a massive amount of awareness from my vantage point of like, who is she and what is she doing? I think you do a really good job as well. I became aware of you through LinkedIn, and I think what it speaks to is the immediacy of being able to establish yourself, establish credibility, and then connect with people in a network that can do business with you. It's an incredibly powerful platform if you use it properly.
I mean, I had no idea. Like, I never was on LinkedIn, and that's exactly what happened for me. I mean, I reached out to people and people responded and they could see the stories that I wrote, and I had no answers, right? But I had lots of stories and lots of questions, and I really enjoy thoughtful discourse. I enjoy hearing what people think I'm right about and where the holes are in my logic, and it was a great place for that. And I think it also, it's so cliche, but it really is, but I'm going to say it anyway. This whole like attraction marketing, right? It was like, I just put myself out there and said, these are the questions I have. This is where I am.
But even if you were asking questions that at that time you weren't able to field an answer to, you're still adding value because you're creating the discourse itself, right? And you're allowing other people to step in and establish their own expertise and say, hey, this is actually what we do. And I think people are so scared that if they're not an expert or so scared if they don't have all the answers to never take a step at all. And the people that are just willing to take action and take that step end up surpassing them or accelerating their growth in their network because they were willing to put themselves out there. And it's okay not to be perfect. I can't tell you how many times a day somebody will ask me a question. They think I automatically know the answers. I think I know all the answers. I'm like, I don't know that, but I can find somebody who does. But I'm willing to say that I don't know the answer and not pretend that I do and BS my way through it.
That's
it great? Also great, right? It's liberating not to feel like you have to know every single answer too.
And I think it sets a good example for other people, you know, even in a boardroom or, you know, somewhere it's a more intimidating environment. Like, I've had great luck saying, I'm sorry, what does fiduciary mean again, right?
Yeah.
Like,
how do you spell that?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, oftentimes it's happened enough times that, then you've got 80% of the room who's like, yeah, we want to know too. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a place that a lot of us find ourselves in.
Well, I conduct webinars all the time. And so I lead these for whether it's with Pareto or on self-funding, and I lead these webinars. And you can kind of tell people want to ask questions, but especially when it's virtual, there's this sort of diffusion of responsibility. No, I don't want to ask. I'll just hide. But it's like if you don't encourage and facilitate their ability to comfortably ask a question, nobody will ask a question. Mm-hmm. And what you're talking about is it's almost like, I hate safe space, but you're creating a safe space to ask a question. Yeah. When inevitably other people want to ask that same question, but they're scared of looking silly or scared of not knowing. Yes. So they'll keep their mouth shut instead. That's the worst possible outcome, in my opinion. And so that can be frustrating at times because I know when I present, I sometimes will present lofty concepts. I go pretty fast because I've been doing this stuff for years. Yeah. And I'm like, I need somebody to tell me where I should stop. Otherwise, I'm just going to zoom past you guys and nobody's going to come along at all. You know? And as a salesperson, you can feel that happening in real time, and it's just frustrating because you feel like you failed. But it's just like people weren't comfortable asking a question and asking you to stop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think LinkedIn is, it provided me with an opportunity to look stupid in a controlled environment, right? Fair enough. And be authentic and ask these questions. And no one, I don't think anyone's ever come to me and said anything negative or hateful. People disagree with me. Yeah. This is fine. I'm comfortable in that space. But what I did start noticing is my DMs would fill up with, hey, I've had this experience too. Hey, thank you so much for sharing that. I never thought about it that way. And it allowed me to make authentic, real connections and real friendships that are more real even than, the ones that I've had just in my life of people I met at a coffee shop or at work. And it's just a unique opportunity that I didn't really know existed. That's
cool. I'm glad you did it. And I got to ask you a question about cheerleading, but probably not the question you think I'm going to ask. Do you feel that I looked at your profile, it says NFL cheerleader on it. Do you feel that you actually have to overcome perceptions about you because you were NFL cheerleader? Is there any stigma associated with that where it challenges your credibility or you have to prove yourself? I'm curious.
What a great question.
Thank you.
I say
Every
that.
Every once in a while I ask an okay question.
Whatever. I'll take it, Spencer. I'm going to pretend this one's good. I'm just kidding. It's interesting because it's so stupid. It's a point of friction that I have struggled with. And it's like, it would be so easy to just leave it off, right? And pretend it didn't exist and never have to ask myself those questions or think those thoughts. But I can tell you why it's on there. Yeah. For me, growing up, I grew up super humble beginnings. We'll call that a euphemism for being dirt poor. Yeah. And in a community where, women are respected and loved, but I didn't have a lot of female influences of, women really excelling in their careers or, working outside of the home. Like there was a more restricted view for me in my community. And this path to being an NFL cheerleader, it's not like I had cheered my whole life and this was just a natural fit for me. When I decided that I was going to do this, I was 25 pounds overweight. I had a pre-diabetes diagnosis. My doctor was telling me I needed to take metformin and not to worry. One day I would have type 2 diabetes, but they would take care of me then too. This is really the place that I was in at 19, 20 years old, thinking that this was the life I was being set up to live. And that one decision to do this really hard thing that was, really unattainable, even when I started out and said, this is what I'm doing. There's a big part of me that's like, this is never going to happen. And I tried out the first year, again, 25 pounds heavier than I was the second year when I made it. But I tried out for 3 different teams. I, really put myself in a vulnerable position, and I failed objectively, right? By objective
I think if
definitions.
you fail, you fail when you quit. I don't think you fail just because the first time around it doesn't work.
Exactly. So, at this very young age, I had to confront the question of, if you want something really big and you want something that's hard, what do you do when you strike out 3 times? And it's one of my proudest moments, because could I do that now? Could I try something really hard 3 times and be terrible at it and then move on? Of course I could.
Sure.
But that girl, that 20, 21-year-old girl, I don't know how she found the knowledge and the wisdom to do that, but she did. And anyway, it's just it was a really cool turning point for me.
Sure.
Tried out the next year. I tried out for 2 teams the next year, made it all the way to the end for one, got cut, and then made the second. But for me, that is what opened up this entire world. And as this cheerleader in this position, I was surrounded by these very successful women who, there were women who did sales for season tickets who were very effective at their jobs. There were the people that I worked with at the USO who, arranged volunteer opportunities. There were the nurses and the doctors and the surgeons that I met through that internship. There were senators and the governor, the lieutenant governor. Like, I got to meet all of these people that I never would have had access to. And the cost of admission was just doing something that was embarrassing and hard.
Right.
And to me, that story, that isn't the story that everyone sees. That's the story that some people see. But that's what I'm proud of.
Most people see what happens after you put in all that effort and went through the internal turmoil and the insecurity, I'm sure, that came along, all those things. Most people only see, oh yeah, of course, she's a great cheerleader. Of course.
Yes.
They don't know what came. It's like that the actor that pops onto the scene. They've been grinding away for 10 years in obscurity, and they get that one break, and now they're, of course, they're an amazing actor. Yeah, but you didn't see the decade
overnight success. And you're like, okay.
But what I love about that story is you chose something that you even felt that was beyond your capability, but you pursued it anyways. And then you failed a few times in a row and kept going, and then you it's almost like you proved to yourself what you were possible of achieving.
Yes, and that was it. And I think about that all the time. I thought about that in the Uber on the way over here. I said, oh man, Spencer's like a celebrity. I don't want to go on his podcast. And I said, who cares? I do hard things, and it's going to be fine.
Well, I did the really silly thing of making a video on a whiteboard about Stop Loss 101 4 years ago, like a doofus, thinking, oh yeah, people will care about that. And believe it or not, there actually was some people that cared about it. And then to say that video, I had these designs that it would turn into this, right? I had no idea. But what it did is just I was willing to take a step that a lot of people aren't willing to do, which is put themselves out there. To look foolish, to take the risk of that, to click post and have it be out there and let people almost judge you with their views and things like that. Fortunately, it worked, but I know so many people, unfortunately, that get themselves up to that step and then talk themselves out of it. And they have no idea what's possible on the other side of that step of being vulnerable. And so I look at it as like, hopefully I'll be a testimonial to somebody someday as an inspiration that they feel they can use my experience to achieve the same thing. And so, I mean, I applaud you. And I only want to ask that question because I wondered if anybody had asked that question of you before. And then so now it translates into there's probably a curiosity and, oh, that's really cool. And now it starts conversations. And then you start to prove, obviously, how credible and intelligent you are and all those things. And now you go, hey, but here's what I'm really passionate about. But they already know, like, and trust you because of that thing that is unique about you, which I think keep using that for your brand.
PlanSight is a complete game changer in the world of insurance brokering. As a broker, you know how time-consuming and error-prone the traditional RFP process can be. But what if I told you there's a better way? PlanSight is the only end-to-end RFP solution on the market made specifically for benefits agencies. It's like having a superpower that gets you an average of 8 to 10 hours back per employer renewal per year. And the best part? PlanSight supports all carriers, all funding types, and all group sizes for over 20 different benefits. If you're ready to make your RFP process faster, more efficient, and more profitable, it's time to call PlanSight. Visit plansight.com now to book a free demo and discover the future of insurance renewals.
But let's get into like the thing that you are passionate about fully, this idea of patient advocacy. I will even ask you, why don't you define what that means? Like, tell me, if the audience has never heard that term before, what does that mean?
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't actually know what that term means to other people. When I say it, it is the closest approximation to language that describes a whole host of things. But, I feel most vulnerable when I feel like I don't have any agency. I don't understand what the options are. I don't understand what I need to do. And I feel like when I'm in that place, that's probably the darkest place that I personally could be in as a patient, as a, as an employee, as anyone, right? And, we, in medicine, we talk a lot about paternalism and where is the line between telling your patient what to do for their own good and educating them so that they can make their own decisions through their own moral and intellectual filters. And for me, when I think about patient advocacy, the voice that I want to be is I want to be the voice that says, this is your body, this is your choice. I'm just the guide.
Well, even letting people know they actually have a choice. A lot of folks treat their physician like an authority figure where their word is gospel and you have to take their word or else. And I think even just knowing, like, hold on a second, we're allowed to sit and think about this, and here's what you should consider. I mean, having somebody over here on the sidelines that's on your team willing to step in and advocate for you, because that's really what we're talking about, advocating on behalf of somebody that maybe isn't armed with the experience, or let's say they're unconscious. Let's say they're, a family member is an advocate on behalf of somebody else and they don't know what to do. Like, I can see like where people are just so incredibly vulnerable, and that's where you really need somebody in your corner. Yes, and
it's in those moments, right, that you're most vulnerable to being taken advantage of. You're most vulnerable to fear-mongering of, 1,000 different flavors. Like, it's a very special place. And I think, that is the difference that I want to make, is empowering people so that they understand that they do have choices and they do have agency. And these are the questions that you can ask. And, it's your clinician's boss. It's, it's their job to help you make this decision, not to make it for you. And I've seen the difference that makes at the bedside. And it's honestly what allowed me, when I finally did, decide to make this jump into the business side of healthcare. I was sitting at a restaurant with Jennifer Berman, who is now my boss. At the time, I thought, oh, well, we're going to be friends. We live in this area. What difference do you want to make in life? Here's the difference I'm trying to make. And, we sat and we had a very honest discussion. And she said, that's why I love what I do, because what I do is, instead of bringing that information and being the guide for a patient, I bring that information and I'm the guide for a benefits advisor. Like, here are the things that you should be considering, as far as compliance goes, or, here are the things that an employer should be considering when they're responsible for making decisions for all of their employees. And I think, just having that discussion really opened my eyes into how similar the business sides and the clinical sides are.
Well, you keep stressing the business side, and I want to ask you this question because I didn't go to medical school, but you constantly hear about how physicians aren't really trained to run a business, right? They learn the business of medicine in the sense of how to practice it as most effectively as possible. But nobody really arms them with like, well, here's how to run an actual practice, or here's taxes, right? Like, why is it that part is so neglected throughout medical school where they're not trained how to be operators as well?
I wish I knew the answer to that question, and I don't. And
when you were going through and becoming a PA, was there any, here's a business class, here's an accounting class?
That's exactly what that's exactly where I want to go with this, because, I can't speak for everyone. I can say that I've never heard of anyone who has said that they've had a good foundation in that. But I certainly did not. In PA school, that was not something that we really covered. And I mean, it's even deeper than that and worse than that,
Okay.
if I could say that. I remember second semester pharmacology. I'm sitting and we're talking about antibiotics. So we're talking about antibiotics. We're talking about something like a urinary tract infection, a bladder infection, and he's going through and he's talking about like the different options that you have for antibiotics. And so I can't keep my mouth shut. So I raise my hand and I'm like, look, you just gave us 5 options for this. What if this information you said is supposed to be available isn't available? Like what they've taken before or what's going around. How would we make that decision? And also, how do I know how much these drugs cost? Because I grew up dirt poor, and I can tell you that if we couldn't afford the medication, we didn't have access to it. So like, how do we go about, like, who tells us this information?
Yeah.
And I was very quickly told that it was really none of my business how much things cost. It is my job to understand the standard of care and how to take care of people. And I shouldn't be concerned with the price of healthcare. And this is my interpretation of it, was that question was not something they were excited to be asked or was appropriate. Like it was somehow dirty for me to bring up the fact that medicine and pharmaceuticals cost money, and how do we negotiate
that
this?
should be evaluated within that equation of
Yes.
Yeah. It's wild. That would be like you go into a mechanic and basically them telling you what needs to be done, and then you're like, okay, how much is it going to cost? And they go, well, don't worry about that. We just need to do these things. And then you just go, oh, okay, sure, Mr. Mechanic, I trust you, and let's go do it. If cost doesn't enter the equation in most discussions because some third party, an insurance carrier, is most of the time bearing the full brunt of that cost or a majority of that cost. And so I think it's unfortunate, because what it'll lead to is what we were talking about earlier this morning with my guests, is the functionally uninsured or underinsured populace, where we have the majority of people in the United States have insurance, but then they don't actually get to use it because they can't afford to even use it, or they go bankrupt when they actually use it, right? So that doctor should care, because the system itself could collapse if we don't all collectively care about it. But then it just frustrates me too, because these should be pretty easy questions to answer, like how much does a drug cost? Well, if you've got a drug rep coming in and telling you how great this drug is and you're prescribing it to everybody, did you ever in your mind think about what the costs might be before you keep writing these prescriptions? Or do you care? And are the incentives too misaligned to actually cause you to care, right? These are hard questions that need answers, and I think they should be posed regularly as well.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why I write on the internet. That's part of why I have these conversations. Because why isn't this front page news? Why aren't people talking about this at the dinner table? Why is this not, something that we're outraged about, a problem that we're desperate to solve? And it's almost as if we've just sort of accepted that there's nothing we can do about it, and this is how it is. And again, we're in this vulnerable place where we just feel like we have no agency, and we have no ability to make any choice about it. So why bother?
Well, and so with MCQ, with Jen, what's your role there specifically with her?
Yeah. So she said, well, I am, very excited about starting, actually, instead of just having, some people working on fiduciary responsibility, we're going to have a whole department that is laser focused on this. Would you like to do that? Would you like to be involved in that? And I said, well, what kind of impact can I have, right? Like, what does this look like? And, and she said, well, the main skill set that we need is someone who wants to make a difference by informing the people that need to know things, what the rules are, what the process looks like, making it easy instead of talking over their heads, making it, customer service friendly. Like all of healthcare is such, it feels like a racket most of the time. Like it's very just an unpleasant experience to deal with anything clinically or system wise, and in return, right, for setting up this the solution to what do we do, how do we adhere to fiduciary best practices and do what's best for our clients, you get to make a difference in thousands of lives. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, I'm in.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And is your patient advocacy business running concurrently with that, or sort of like, are they one and the same?
So it's interesting, right? So specific patient advocacy, I feel like I do a lot of writing. I'm in the middle of writing a book, which sounds so cliche, but when you talk about wanting to scale stories and impact, I think that's been recommended to me as a good starting point.
100%.
Yep. But what I think is really cool about fiduciary best practices, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not.
Yeah.
What's really cool about it is that it really is the impact that I want to have, right? So if I can help an employer understand how to set up a process to think about their employees and the way that they should be thinking about decisions that affect their employees, and to set up processes and gather a team around them to ask the right questions. Mm-hmm. Are we doing what's best for our employees, and are we doing what's best for them? Is a complicated question. So like fiduciary responsibility in 401k in the financial world, maybe I'm naive, but it seems like a much more straightforward question, right? Like, are we making money for our employees? Are our accounts doing well? Are our administrative fees low enough? It's a much more simplistic question.
Well,
as opposed to healthcare.
You're not dealing with the complexity of the healthcare system interjected into that equation like we are with what we do.
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans, and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged on a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
But I think with navigation and advocacy, those things become intertwined. So a fiduciary like compliance and responsibility component is, well, how are we spending the money wisely? Are we being good stewards of our employees and our funds on behalf of our employees? Because there's a commingling of those funds. And then it's also, well, then you start going, well, are we helping them find the best care? Because if we help them steer them to the best care, it actually lowers the cost over time. Are we being good advocates for them? Are we helping one individual? I mean, there's plenty of examples where a really extremely expensive drug gets prescribed, and then you find there's a generic alternative over here that saves the plan 6 figures a year. Well, now all of a sudden you benefited the entire plan by lowering the cost of care, which lowers their premiums or their contributions. So it's all sort of like this tangled web, but the advocacy component dovetails nicely in my mind with fiduciary responsibility.
And it does for me also, right? Because the question isn't what's cheapest, and the question also isn't what's best, right? The question is some sort of commingling of those ideas and weighing what's best for everyone versus maybe what's best for one person. And, when I talk to people and I talk to clients and employers and people that we're working with, I say, it's almost like parenting. You have kids, you absolutely can't make definitively the right decision. Because what does that even mean? What is the right decision? Like, who knows? What you can do is you can make sure that you're informed about your options. And you can understand the pluses and minuses involved in all of them, and you can do the best you can. And, the difference is that in, fiduciary best practices, you want to document that you had that conversation and thought about it, right? Yeah. Okay, fine. But, essentially it's the same process, right? It's not about finding the right answer, because the right answer is going to be different in every situation.
Well, at the most fundamental, base form, we're in the business of risk, or at least I'm on the risk side. And so the way that I look at it is risk will never disappear. I can't make risk disappear, especially healthcare related risk. The best we can do is manage it based on the evidence that we have, the options that are available. You have to accept trade-offs with every single decision you make. But you're trying to recommend the best possible option in that circumstance. And then you have to accept the outcome is uncontrollable
Yeah.
to a certain degree after that.
Yeah.
And that's the way I look at like everything from like a stop loss to a captive. It's like you do your best to set up the best vehicle contractually.
Yep.
After that, it's sort of up to a little bit of chance, and it's up to some good management by the consultant and the employer. But I can't dictate whether somebody gets hit by a bus tomorrow or somebody contracts cancer. Like
Yes.
we can't control those things. And so you just have to set up the best possible environment to do your best under the circumstances.
Yeah.
That's the way that I view it. And so this is the nature of the game that we play.
Yeah.
We're not in mathematics like your daughter is, where there's 2 + 2 always equals 4, and
Yeah.
you can prove that. And so I guess like for me, it's about effective communication. It's about taking really complex ideas and making them as simple as possible, communicating those to the masses so that they're aware. And then I also like to hope that it's, to some degree, this podcast is sort of drawing a generation of people that might not be interested in this thing that we call employee benefits and insurance to say, hey, that actually doesn't sound so bad, or that actually might be kind of interesting.
Yes.
Let me bring my brain and my potential to this industry to help solve problems.
Yes, I think that's a really cool point that I hadn't thought about until 2 seconds ago,
Okay.
right? But it's like
I don't think I thought about it until 2 seconds
It's
ago.
a great-
I just said it out loud.
it's a really great creative outlet
Yeah,
because
it
there
is.
really are, I mean, as humans, I believe that we're, set up to want to solve problems. And it's a really impactful, really cool problem to solve, right? To figure out how do I make healthcare accessible to people in the best way and with the least friction. And there's a lot of options to do that. And you guys do that, plan design in a lot of different really
Well,
cool
and so
ways.
let me ask you this. So I got 2 questions. One, are you able to say what your book is about? Like, is it too premature? To do that?
No, I
so
have an
what is
outline.
What is your outline? And so like you'll probably have about 3 months before this comes out. So hopefully now it's going to create some accountability
Oh, it's
to get this
true.
book that you're about to talk about.
Oh, it's true.
Insta long. Okay, so what is it going to be about? Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know. The thing that, look at me, I'm like, I don't know what it's about. Okay, I know exactly what
know
it's
what it's
about.
about.
Okay.
Yeah.
But basically, what I would love to do is give insight into examples of how these tough questions that advisors and employers and just humans on this earth are having to confront as far as healthcare goes, to provoke them to think about what they believe, right? Because I'm all about this autonomy. And so I have it organized into, I'm going to call it Tales from the Pit or something similar, because that's what we call the emergency room.
I didn't know
in
that.
the
Okay,
hospital.
Tales from the
Yeah.
Pit. Okay,
Tales
now
from the Pit
it
or
makes-
something similar.
Yeah.
And basically, I just want to share stories of things, very emotional situations people have met, patients I've treated in the emergency department, and the complexities that go along with that, right? And I can think of so many different stories, but the one story that always stands out, and I think it is like the case of my career that I just can't let go. But when you have a pediatric patient that has a potentially bad outcome, comes in and something really horrible has happened, and you have a pediatric code, like the ethics that go into how do you manage these situations? You do the best you can. You want to help this child. You want the child to live, right? And the whole time that you're doing all of these things for hours and hours, right? There's 40 different ethical questions that could be explored at length for the rest of my life that I could never have an answer to, right? At what point do we think it's justified to pay $80,000 for the helicopter transport to a hospital when there's a 0.01% chance of something happening? I feel like if I asked a parent what they thought of that, if you asked me, I'm like, sign me up.
Call it
Here's the check.
Yeah,
Here's my credit card.
yeah.
Like, I don't know. Let's go.
Yeah.
But there are a million complex situations that happen all the time, from something as fundamental as that, where we're talking about at what percentage are different treatments reasonable.
Yeah.
Right, which is just a horrible
Well, that's
question.
like one of those questions. Like, let's say somebody passes away as a result of somebody else's
Yes.
action. Like courts will sometimes have to assign a value to a person's life, or you lose a leg, they have to assign like that's a weird thing to do, to assign a monetary value to a loss of a limb or to a death of an individual.
Yes.
But at the same time, there is an economic impact to that thing that happens.
Yes.
And so I look at it all the time in the stop loss world. You find about horrible things that happen, right? Really bad claims. And then sometimes even people, you find out, I remember reading a car accident, and it was one of the first times I dug into claims, and somebody's child passed away in the car accident. It was like, but I'm going through this from like a financial lens, thinking about what is this claim going to cost? And it's like a weird thing that you become, this is reality, this is a life, it's a human being, and there's a value assigned to how much that thing costs at the same time. It's just a bizarre moment.
And it's I'm so glad that you bring that up, because sometimes when I talk about these things, I feel like a monster. I feel, but these are actual conversations that I'm not having, because I have one goal and one goal only, right, in the hospital. But these are questions that we're confronting as an industry and as a society, and what does that look like? Or something even as simple as, a patient who comes in with an ingrown toenail or some, very small issue that they spent 2 years of school telling me not to give that person an antibiotic because that is not the appropriate treatment. And, 100% of ER providers are giving you the antibiotic for it, right? So how do you balance the risk to losing your license for the 0.1% that could have a bad outcome if you don't overtreat something that you've been taught not to overtreat, with all of the harm that comes from, financially and clinically, from overtreating something that really didn't need an antibiotic. So I think there are a lot of, ethical questions that there's a lot of gray area, and I'm hoping to at least bring some of those stories to light, so that people can even think about it, because a lot of times... Well,
and if you use story, right, if you narrate it rather than necessarily make it super clinically involved, it's going to compel your average person, and I mean average in the sense that their average understanding of the healthcare system, not they're just an average person, but their average understanding of healthcare, they could still connect with, I see the problem there. But that doesn't seem right. I think we need a lot more people coming to the conclusion that doesn't seem right, and passing that judgment to say, you know what, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to stand for that. I think there's still a relative lack of awareness overall, again, with your average understanding of healthcare, just how bad and broken it is inside. And so you have to use story to actually convince those people to care. I think, why should I care, right? At the end of the day, I was even thinking a new tagline for our podcast is, what did I say? Healthcare that care. Why you should care. A podcast that cares about healthcare. Because I think healthcare, in a sense, we've lost the care component, and it's more just not only the care that we render, but why you should care as a human being, because you're going to find yourself on the receiving end of something at some point in the future.
100%.
And is that system going to be as badly broken as it is today? If you want to answer this, the question, that answer is no, I don't want it to be bad. We need to care today about it, and we need to do something about it. That's the way. So what's a moonshot for you with this idea of, you've got this book, you're building your personal brand. I sometimes hate that term, but you're building your personal brand.
It's terrible.
It's recognizable, and you're doing an excellent job at it. And then you obviously have what you're doing for MZQ and the patient advocacy. So you've got a lot going on. What is the ultimate culmination in your mind of what the future will look like for you, and how are you making the maximum impact? I'm going to ask you to look in your crystal ball.
I know, and I'm actually still looking in my crystal ball, but I think the impact, I know that the impact that I want is, I want everyone that I come in contact with, who comes in contact with my work, to know that things are gray and they're not black and white. And whatever your benefits advisor tells you, whatever your doctor tells you, it may very well be good advice, but that it's your personal responsibility to ask more questions and to really understand what's happening, and to know that they're doing the best they can to advise you in the best way that they can, but that there are no right and wrong answers. And that's the eventual impact that I'm looking for. And it's just a matter of how much know, like, and trust, and in how many different angles, can I do this? Can I empower an employer by showing them a process for evaluating their vendors or their plan expenditures, right? Is it as simple as that? Or is it, having an impact on a patient to say, your doctor's doing the best they can. That's why they're recommending this treatment to you. But try asking why that treatment? I understand that you're recommending this drug to me. Why is it that this is the drug that you've chosen to recommend first? Do I have to take that drug to get better, or is this just to make me feel better?
Yeah.
When should I seek, help? When should I call you if it's not working? Are there things that tell me I should go to the emergency room? I don't want to give people answers. I just want to give people the capacity to ask more questions.
Yeah, and what people really need get back to the idea of an advocate, they really need a resource to be able to bounce those questions off of.
Yes.
When they're unarmed with the experience or the expertise needed to make that decision critically, they need somebody who is to act as a sounding board and then get, whether it's recommendations or advice or even just confirming, that drug is good. You should take that, right? Or in this circumstance, we believe that's your best course of action, however you phrase it.
Yes.
But that reassurance that somebody else is there with them to be able to guide them, I think that's so crucial. And so I wonder, if I think about amplifying your message, do you speak often? Do you do public speaking? Do you want to do public speaking?
I do public speaking.
Okay.
It is still always a source of anxiety, but I'm told that never goes away.
No, I do it more often than I've ever done in my life.
Okay.
And even if I'm doing something that I've already done 10 times, there's still a level of anxiety that comes from standing in front of a room of 500 people. That just comes with
It
the
just
territory.
is?
I think, though, if you lose that completely, you kind of lose your edge and it becomes just like meh. And I think you might not give your best performance if it, so I think a little bit of anxiety does work as a stimulus. But I've gotten a lot more comfortable over time. It used to be the most terrifying thing I could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
Now, if you pop me in front of a room and say, hey, these 50 people want to know about Pareto, I'm just, boom, I'm going.
Yeah.
But that big stage, on stage in front of people where you have an hour to fill and you go, I hope this goes well, and you just take that first leap, that's still scary. It's still scary today. But once you get over that, and once it's a more manageable level, then it becomes, I think, really fun.
Yeah.
I look forward to it now. Are you at that point yet? Where you
I'm so close to that point. So I'm noticing that it's gotten easier because instead of just abject terror prior, right? As I'm preparing to talk, I'm noticing that the thing I'm really focused on is, am I telling the most impactful message for this audience? Am I sharing the dark parts of my soul that are going to make these individuals think differently about the world? And I think that's a positive sign because it's not about me. It's about
I think a great speaker literally is there in service of the audience. I think about this a lot. And so it's not so much about you, but it is about you and your ability to communicate effectively and move people, but you're doing it for them. You're not doing it for yourself.
Yes.
And so when you flip that paradigm a little bit and that's the way that you go in as an act of service instead, I think that empowers you to be a better speaker because you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yep. Instead. And I finally gotten over the terror part. And that's
because it's very much a look at me kind of thing. Like, hey, everybody, I want to stand on stage and I'm the center of attention.
Seems that way.
But I really think that's an ego-driven reason to do it. But I think if you find yourself you're passionate about something, you have a great message, or you find yourself as you think you're a good orator or speaker, you should be doing that, right? You shouldn't shy away from that because then that's just fear deterring you from something you could be really great at.
Absolutely, yeah. And mostly I just want to see more clinical voices talking about whatever it is that they think is relevant or important for their patients because, as a clinician, how can I practice medicine in the best way possible if I've never spoken to someone like you and vice versa?
Yeah. Well, I really believe it. I'm glad you're connecting both sides because I do think it's time where clinicians, healthcare providers sit across the table of benefits consultants and employers and carriers, and we all come to the table and say, hey, this thing's pretty screwed up. But we all need each other actually to do better. And pointing fingers really, unfortunately, doesn't do a whole lot of good other than make me feel good about myself because I make you the bad guy. But that doesn't actually serve the bigger purpose. So why don't we do this, Tiffany? I know we're going to get to a little happy hour, and thank you to Emma Fox for encouraging and getting you in town to get this set up, and we'll get to go see her. But why don't we do this? Finish off the podcast with closing thoughts. What's like one message do you want to leave, or one nugget you want to leave the audience with to think about?
I really think it's just that you have more options than you think you have. You have more autonomy, ask more questions. Again, with the cliche, but here it is.
Hey.
No question is a stupid question, right? You have the right to understand what's happening, and you also have the responsibility to understand that. And, I agree that we should be creating more spaces for dissenting opinions and thoughtful discourse, respectful discourse.
I actually love disagreement. Like, I'll post sometimes, and a lot of people I agree, 100% agree, and then somebody will be like, hey, I don't mean to be like a thorn in your side, but I disagree. I'm like, great. Because maybe you've actually challenged a belief I had or an idea that I had where I didn't think about that. Maybe you're right. Maybe that actually causes me to slightly change my opinion. People are so afraid to disagree because I think we've gotten to a point right now where disagreement can't be civil. Like, I remember growing up where you could civilly disagree on really big things and then still hug and high five each other afterwards. And I'd love to get to a point where we're back where we can have hard conversations, but have them civilly and disagree at the same time. Yeah. So I'm very glad you said that.
Yep. And finding your people that you can do that with, right? Because, maybe you can't start by doing it on LinkedIn, but you can start with one person in your circle that you know disagrees with you. Mine is David Mordo.
Okay.
He is my personal check. Like, he comes to all of my events, and he says, you just did so lovely. That was a lovely story. Let me tell you the part I hated. And I say, all right, give it to me.
Well, so we started off with Dave not liking my Tom Broker posts, which I kind of jab back and forth, and it was kind of funny because we would take a little bit of like I'll poke you and I'll poke you. But it was really funny at the end. Like, I like Dave Mordo a lot. I don't think I've actually met him in person, but I desperately...
he's even better in person.
I desperately want to meet him because I want somebody to take a little jab at me and but then it's fun, right? And I don't take that thing personally. And again, it comes back down to disagreement. Those people keep you balanced and keep you checked as well.
He actually made me understand that prior authorization is not 100% a terrible idea, right? So, I do think that, even when I find that I'm not willing to concede the point, I understand the argument more thoroughly. And sometimes
then you can argue the other side. And
true.
I know I kept talking and I had closing thoughts, so we'll talk after the podcast.
Yes.
But I think the ability to argue both sides is actually really, really immensely useful.
Yep.
When you have your point of view and your worldview, until you know how to argue against it, you're not going to be really effective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll stop there. All right. Thanks, Tiff. Appreciate it.